rages on. Does India link us to British rulers? What should be our 21st century identity? Can Bharat and India coexist? Top cultural historians Devdutt Pattanaik and Sanjeev Sanyal exclusive on Newstrack.
Hello and welcome. As the political war over India and Bharat explodes, it is important to immerse ourselves in the historical, cultural and mythological roots of the names India and Bharat. Is it correct to say that Bharat is the true native name of our country and India is an external imposition, or is the reality far more complex than this simplistic formulation? To shed critical light on this vexed historical and political debate, I am delighted to be joined on India Today's news track by well-known mythologist and author of Myth Equal to Mithya, a handbook of Hindu mythology and multiple other books, Devdutt Pattanaik. Devdutt, welcome to India Today. Let me start by asking you to share your views on the idea that the name of our country should really be Bharat and not India, or at least Bharat should be used much more than India, because Bharat is the name that has Indic roots and we should not be promoting a name that was the name the outside world saw us by. That India was never really the name of this country. The name really is Bharat. India is the name the rest of the world, particularly the Greeks, started calling our country by. How do you look at the entire controversy that's playing itself out right now? Devdutt Pattanaik.
Namaste Rahul, thank you for inviting me. This is an interesting question, but let me give you a mythological answer. Now, in the Middle Eastern mythologies, there is an obsession with one God, one life, one prophet, singularity. Indian mythology loves diversity, plurality. So many gods, many ideas, many saints, many ways of thinking. We have always been a land which appreciates diversity and dynamism. So there is a Middle Eastern concept of singularity and there is an Indian concept of plurality. So when somebody says we should have only one name, one idea, one thought, one language, they're really drifting towards Middle East, which is the mother of Western civilization, right? I think India should retain its identity and celebrate plurality. And therefore our gods, we have many gods and every god has many names. So you have Shiva, it can be called Shankar, can be called Bholenath. You have Vishnu, who can be called Narayan. So I think we belong to a land which celebrates diversity. We should not follow the Middle Eastern path. This is my personal view.
Could you share with those watching your understanding of the origins and the roots of the name India?
So the question about India, the origins of the name India, and you use this word native, Indic, this is foreign, this suggestion. So the word India is derived from a Sanskrit word called Sindhu. Sindhu means a river. Very specifically, it refers to the river that passes across India for several hundred kilometers before entering Pakistan. From Sindhu comes the name Sindhadesha. Now the Arabs cannot pronounce Sa, so they started using the word Ha. So Sapta Sindhu became Hapta Hindu. Sindh became Hind. And 2500 years ago, we have the Persian king referring to India as Hind. The Greeks come to India. They can't say Ha, they say E. So Indu, Indus, Indica. So Megasthenes writes the book Indica, but he's really referring to the word Sindhu. So the origin of the word India comes from the Sanskrit word Sindhu. Sindh, Hind, Ind. Sindhu, Hindu, Indu, Indus. In fact, the word Indu means the moon and is the name of Ramchandra's grandmother. So Ram, who established Ram Rajya, his father was Dashrath. His grandfather, that is Dashrath's father, was Aja, who was married to Indumati. So maybe India comes from Indu, Indumati, Indus, Sindhu. So it's a very Indian sounding name. So we have associated it with the Greeks, Some people think it's the British. Not really. That's really uneducated people say such things. But it's not even the Greeks. It's really a Sanskrit word from the Rig Veda, Sindhu, which gives us India.
That's as far as India is concerned. I was reading your piece this morning. Could you explain to our viewers your understanding of the emergence of the word Bharat, its various contexts, the context in the north, the context in the south, in the light of the suggestion that this is the true Indian and true native name of our country?
Yeah, so people have been asking me about Bharat. So the word Bharat comes from the word Bharat. And Bharat, the name first comes from the Rig Veda. You have Bharata, king of the Bharata clan, winning the battle of 10 kings in the Rig Veda. We don't know much about them. Now, Rig Veda happens only in the Kurukshetra region. Then you have the Mahabharata epic, again talking about the Bharata clan, and again it happens only in the northern part of India. Kuru Panchala region is roughly what is today Delhi, Mathura, up to Prayagraj. That's the zone. The first time the word Bharat Varsha is carved in stone, it is about 2100 years ago in Odisha, in the Hathigumpa caves. You find this name Bharatvarsha, but it's referring to only the Gangetic region west of Magad. So it doesn't refer to the whole of India. So Bharat word really is a word which refers to certain parts of North India. Bharatvarsha refers to certain parts of North India. It's, it is a name given by Brahmins. So, whenever people say Bharat, Khanda, Bharatvarsha, these are really coming from Brahmin sources, Vedas, Puranas, Dharmashastras, something like Arya Desha, the land of Aryans. So Bharata is the king of the Aryans, the victorious kings of the Aryans. So it's a very North Indian Brahminical word that emerges. And one must remember that. There's another Bharat, of course, very famous from the Jain traditions, who is the son of Rishabhdev, the first Tirthankara, and Bharat is the first Chakravarti. And I believe that probably the word Bharat really comes from the Jain traditions, but we don't value Jain traditions. Remember, Jainism was very powerful at one time, but it was driven out of many parts of India, like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. So really the Bharata Chakravarti would have been known in South India in a very, very big way. North Indian Bharat perhaps comes from Brahmin traditions, and the South Indian Bharat perhaps comes from Jain traditions. So, we have to think about these things which we usually don't teach these things in history, right? The Jain Bharata, who is a Chakravarti from South India, maybe, where, he visits his brother Bahubali statues in the South India. So we have to think about these characters also.
As people listen to both your answers, would it then be fair to conclude that Bharat, the name, has its origins entirely in India? Where you gave the story about Indumati, which is, as you write, possibly also a WhatsApp forward, not necessarily entirely historical, probable but not necessarily true. But on balance, the chances are higher that India was really an external interpretation of the name of our motherland. It had roots in India, but India is what the Greeks and the others called us. So then the question becomes, what should our country really be called? An idea which is native, or a name which is external to our country?
I don't think that the word Bharat comes from India, and India comes from foreigners. That's not a conclusion. That's your conclusion. That's a political conclusion, and that comes from Chanakya Niti of divide and rule, Sam, Dam, Danda, Bhed. But India comes from the word Sindhu, which is a Vedic word. Bharat comes from Bharat, which is also found in the Vedas. Bharat also comes from Bharat, which is a Jain word. So we must be aware that the word Sindhu was called Hindu by Persians and Hindu by Greeks, but they didn't give us the word. It comes from an Indian river, a Vedic river called Sindhu. So, the Brahmins of India, the Brahmana, they have controlled the literature of our land, right? So Aryans, the word Arya comes from Brahmins, but the Jains and the Buddhists look at Aryans very differently compared to the Hindus. So we must be careful of the Brahmin use of the word Bharat and appropriation from the Jain traditions, right? They are appropriating it from the Jain traditions, one can argue. But the word Sindhu is a Vedic word, and India comes from Sindhu. So this internal, external, it's again Brahminical, right? It's a caste thing, right? What is internal is pure, what is external is malech, is impure, and the impure people should be kept out the way untouchables were kept out. The untouchables were kept out of our villages. So we should not celebrate this mindset. It's not healthy. This is a very Brahmin caste mindset, that internal things, अंदर की चीजें कोटियाड़ के अंदर रखो, उसके बाहर उल्लंघन, Sita crossed the Lakshman Rekha and therefore becomes impure. Outside is bad, inside is good. Not a healthy mindset, I think. We are a plural country. We allow things to come in. Potatoes have come from outside and we celebrate potatoes. Horses have come from outside and we celebrate. Aryans came from outside and we call ourselves Arya Desha. So, we should just allow internal, everybody came from Africa. So we are all technically, genetically African. So I think these are, but then politicians know better than scholars. We are like, हम तो mythologists हैं, scholars हैं. Those, उनके हाथ में तलवार है. Those who have the sword are far more powerful than those with the pen, right? And the Brahmins know this too.
Devdutt, changing a name isn't just about nomenclature. It's also cultural, it's political. Bombay became Mumbai, Calcutta became Kolkata, Madras became Chennai. While these changes were opposed by many at the time, they now are commonly accepted. Do you see any similarities and dissimilarities between what was done in the names of the cities and what seems to be attempted now?
Yes, changing names is something that politicians do when we don't give ourselves names, right? Our parents give us names, elders give us names, teachers give us names. And then when do we change our names? When we change our religion. When you change your religion, you change your name. When you become a sannyasi, you change your name. So I think that is where the mindset, changing religion, this conversion idea is what leads us to deny ourselves. The greatest countries in the world have multiple names. Germany is called Deutschland. China is not called China by the Chinese. The local people call it a very different name. Bhutan is called very differently. The Bhutanese call Bhutan Drukyul, if I'm not mistaken. So, all great civilization. We say Egypt, but the Arabs call it Misr. So great civilizations have different names because different people have engaged with it. I guess we don't want to be a great civilization. We want to follow the Middle Eastern path of monotheism, one idea, one thought. We hate our plurality. We see alternate ideas as polluting, which is a Brahminical caste mindset. I guess that's the path we want to walk, and I think that's an option.
Okay, thank you very much, Devdutt Pattanaik, for joining us and sharing your views on the India-Bharat controversy. Appreciate your time. Thank you. I want to go across now for an alternate point of view to Sanjeev Sanyal. Sanjeev Sanyal is a well-known economist. He's also the author of many books to do with history and mythology, and has a point of view very different from the point of view of Devdutt Pattanaik. Sanjeev Sanyal, welcome to the news track. I want you to start by responding to the assertion that picking one name is essentially a Mid-Eastern thing to do. It's not an Indian thing to do. The Indian sensibility is one of plurality, multiplicity, diversity, and therefore it shouldn't be about prioritizing Bharat over India. We've seen multiple ministers, spokespeople. We saw Mohan Bhagwatji, the RSS Sarsang Chalak, say push India, drive India. That seems to be a cultural political agenda at this point in time. The invitation from President Draupadi Murmu says President of Bharat. The Prime Minister's cards for the ASEAN summit say Prime Minister of Bharat. The same was the case when he went for the BRICS summit. How do you see this play out? Is this an attempt really by the right to push up and reprioritize the usage of the name Bharat?
Well, I don't even understand what the debate is about. I mean, the fact is that Bharat is a well-established name for India. It's there in our constitution. So is India, by the way. It's, the constitution starts with India, that is Bharat. So both the names have been in wide use. In Indian languages, we normally use Bharat. Happened to be that when we use English, we tended to use India, but there is nothing in there not to allow us to use Bharat as well. As I said, the constitution, the English version of the constitution starts with India, that is Bharat. So, it is, I think we should be happy enough to use the name Bharat commonly. And by the way, we are hardly the only country in the world that has multiple names. I mean, you have the United Kingdom, which is also called Great Britain. You have Netherlands and Holland. You have Japan and Nippon. So, we can also use Bharat and India interchangeably when we wish, wherever we want. So, I don't see why somehow the use of the word Bharat is somehow seen as an intrusion into the English language.
Let's get into this assertion that Bharat is the native name of our country, whereas India is a foreign imposition. The Greeks used the word India first, even though it comes from the word Sapt Sindhu, an Indian river, but India is not an original name of our country. Do you buy this, the argument that India is a foreign idea or a foreign imposition, and that the name that we should use should really be Bharat, which is our internal formulation?
So let me explain how the name India came about and how the name Bharat came about, but they actually come from the same origin. So you need to understand what the origin is. Now the name Bharat actually has two origin stories. There is an older origin story, which is a Vedic origin story, and a later one, which is a Puranic one. But the link between the names Bharat and India actually go back to the Vedic story, the original Bronze Age story. So let me tell you that story, then you will immediately understand how this works. So back in the early Bronze Age, the Vedic age, we are told in the Rig Veda that there was a tribe called the Bharatas, or also called the Trutsus, who lived in roughly what is now Haryana. And they used to call their homeland Sapta Sindhu, or the land of the 7 rivers. Now what happens is that the Bharatas are attacked from the west by a coalition of 10 tribes. And there is a great battle on the banks of the river Ravi, or then called Parushti, in which the Bharatas completely decimate the 10 tribes. Then what happens is that they turn eastward and they defeat another chieftain called Bheda on the banks of the Yamuna. So what happens is that the Bharatas, start out from this original homeland called the Sapta Sindhu in Haryana, and they spread out and create India's first empire. And their chieftain, whose name is Sudas, then conducts the first Ashwamedha Yagya and becomes a Chakravartin, whose symbol is the wheel. So we have the Mauryan wheel in our flag, but the origin of the idea of it being the symbol of power actually goes back to King Sudas of the Bharata tribe. Now, note here that there is 2 words. One is Bharata and there is Sapta Sindhu. The Sapta Sindhu is the name of their homeland and Bharata is the name of the tribe. Now, note here next what happens. What happens is that the Bharatas, they do something quite unique. You see, typically a tribe would just impose their gods on whoever were the defeated gods. Instead, the Bharatas call all the defeated tribes and even the tribes that were surrounding them, they hadn't defeated them, but they were in contact with them. And they basically put together all the knowledge they have, which we now know as the compilation of the Vedas, the first 3 Vedas. And in the very last chant of the Rig Veda, there is something like a contract between all these tribes where they say that, look, we will give all the tribes and their gods a place around the sacrificial fire. So in the very last chant of the Rig Veda, all the tribes that they knew about, all their gods were given a place around the sacrificial fire. So it's sort of like a contract, and in some ways, this is the idea of pluralism that triggers Indian civilization. It is an idea of assimilation as opposed to imposition. Now what happens is this idea begins to spread. So over a period of time, this idea, more and more gods have given place around the sacrificial fire, and more people begin to accept the identity of being Bharatiya. And so by the Iron Age, the whole landscape of the Indian subcontinent has come to call itself Bharatiya, and the land of the 7 rivers idea, the Sapta Sindhu, then comes to cover the whole idea. So you end up with this chant, which is very commonly used even today during when you do ritual baths and so on, which goes somewhat like this: Gange cha Yamunu chaiva Godavari Saraswati Narmade Sindhu Kaveri Jalasmin Kuru. So what does it do? The 7 rivers, which were originally just the tributaries of the Sindhu, of the Saraswati, it didn't include, by the way, the Sindhu river. The Sapta Sindhu includes only the tributaries of the Saraswati originally. They came to take over all these rivers across India, which went all the way down to Kaveri. So now all of India becomes Sapta Sindhu. Okay, so this is the origins of the name Bharata as per the Rigvedic tradition. Now what happens is other countries also call India Sapta Sindhu. Now in the Avesta, which is the Persian texts, what happens is there is a phonetic shift. Devdutt also mentioned a phonetic shift among the Arabs. Actually, it's amongst the Persians, the ancient Avestan Persians. And the sound of Sa becomes Ha. So Saraswati becomes Harahati. By the way, the same thing happens in modern Assamese as well, as it happens to be. And so Sapta Sindhu becomes Hapta Hindu. Now I'm telling you this because this confusion, because the word Sindhu is used in isolation to mean the Sindhu river or the Indus river. That's not the case. The first known use of the word Hindu comes in the context of Hapta Hindu, i.e. Sapta Sindhu, which is the name which the Western Persians called India. And by the way, there seemed to have been some dispute between the Westerns and the Vedic Indians, because they tend to mention that, you know, the Hapta Hindu region had, had gone into bad times and bad things had happened there and so on. So there obviously some sort of a conflict going on there, which we can't tell what exactly it is. Anyway, this is the origin. Hapta Hindu is the origin of the word Hindu. Now, that is correct, that this word then goes further westward and then becomes India. So you go from Sapta Sindhu to Hapta Hindu to Hindu, and then that becomes India. That part of it is absolutely correct. This random extrapolation into the word Hindu, which is an Indian word, etc., which Devdutt did, there is no historical evidence of that. That is a separate issue altogether. But this part of the story that I said, which is the link between Bharata and Sapta Sindhu, is an old one and a very well established one in the text.
How do you respond to the assertion that Bharat is a Brahminical formulation, that the history in the way that it's written, interpreted, narrated, doesn't give as much importance to other traditions from the south of India, the Jain tradition, and because it's written by the Brahmins and therefore they push the idea of Bharat? How do you respond to this?
Well, again, I'm sorry to say that Devdutt has presented some of the facts, but his interpretation is entirely garbled and some of it is actually incorrect. So he mentions the Battle of 10 Kings in Kurukshetra. That's not where it happened at all. It happened on the banks of the Parushni or the Ravi, which is now in the area would be in West Punjab, in what is now Pakistani Punjab, and not in Kurukshetra. Anyway, point is, he is right that there is another tradition of where the Puranic tradition and the Jain tradition, which by the way are very close to each other, that there was a king Bharat, who was a Chakravartin, who was the son or grandson of the king Rishabh. So one of those stories, and there are slight variations on it, so I'll give you one of them. So there was a king Rishabh, who was a great king, and he's the same king who is supposed to be the founder, incidentally, of the Jain tradition. He had a son, by the way, called Nabhi, who was a great warrior, and he is said to have conquered the Jambu Dvipa, or the subcontinent. And in fact, India has another name, by the way, called Nabhi Varsha. Anyway, his son, Bharat, would then go on to become another great conqueror, and so the name Bharatvarsha is by and large from this tradition. By the way, the Puranic tradition on Bharatvarsha and the Jain tradition agree on this, that this is not something of great debate, and turning this into some Brahminical versus Jain thing is meaningless. Also turning it into a North Indian versus South Indian is meaningless, because by the time these Puranic stories are being written, South India is more than comfortably part of the wider Indic civilizational idea. So just so that you know, the oldest known Tamil text is the Tolpakiyam. Okay, it's a grammar. Tolpakiyam is a Tamil grammar, and in the preface of that grammar, Tolpakiyam, it is very clear that you have the very first enunciation of Tamil identity. And it will come as some surprise to those who prefer a Periyarist view of the world, that in that preface, where the first proclamation of Tamil identity is mentioned, it also mentions that this identity is firmly based on the four Vedas. So please go and read the Tolpakiyam, the preface to the Tolpakiyam, and in there read that when the people say, the Tamils enunciate that they are the people who live between the Venkata hills in the north and the Kumari in the south, which is basically not too different from, Kumari is Kanyakumari, and in the north you have the Venkata hills. Then those people, their identity is based on the four Vedas. It is very clearly written. There's no way of getting around it.
Sanjeev, respond also to this idea that just because something is external or came from outside India, it's being presented as bad. Somehow the use of the name India is now sought to be looked down upon. Just because Bharat has original roots in India, therefore it's being pushed up. The idea that this is not healthy, you can't come to the conclusion that something from outside is bad, something from within is good, that so many countries have names internationally which are names that others gave them, rather than names that they came up with themselves for themselves. And the charge that Brahmins, because they were writing the literature, are controlling the literature and controlling what they want to be carried forward for the future generations.
Look, I mean, just repeating Brahminical several times doesn't mean that he answered your question at all. Fact of the matter is, as I said, there is a very ancient Vedic tradition which predates Puranic and Jainism, which talks about India as being part of the Bharat tribe and so on. And of course, as I mentioned, also Saptasindhu, which, by the way, are related very closely, because the Bharat tribe considered the Saptasindhu as being their homeland. And then that idea then spreads, that also we have, as I gave you the chant, that clearly shows this happens, and there are many other evidences. By the time the Puranic evidence comes, the Puranas say that south of the Himalayas and north of the oceans live a people who are the Bharatiya. So again, there are more than enough evidence, and I don't know why this should become Jains versus Brahmins or some strange garbled argument. All the Indic religions clearly understand and celebrate the fact that there is a civilization living between the southern oceans and the northern mountains that consider themselves Bharatiya and partake of this civilization. So this word Bharatiya is very much Indian. Now, as I mentioned, I accept that the word India has Indian origins, but it is not Indian. So Sindhu becomes Hindu, becomes India. So by Devdutt's own admission, that by the time the word becomes India, it is a foreign word. That doesn't mean it's a bad word. It's been used widely. I use it myself. And nowhere has, I think, the government ever said that the word India is being banished. So I don't even understand what this debate is. The Constitution clearly says India, that is Bharat. They are both valid words, and we should use them.
At the time when the Constituent Assembly was debating this India-Bharat question, interestingly, it was on the 18th of September 1949. It's also on the 18th of September 2023 that the government has called this special session of Parliament, leading many to wonder whether the idea is to do away with the name India. We don't know what will happen for certain on this, the 18th of September, but at that time there were lots of leaders in the Constituent Assembly debate who made the argument that Bharatiya is the Indian name and therefore that's the name the country should have, but they wanted to show that India is the modern formulation looking out into the future rather than the past, which is why India was also put in Article 1 of the Constitution. The fact is that till the time the opposition alliance came up with the acronym India to describe what they were doing, there was really no debate over the last 9 years around the use of the name India, and therefore the opposition can say that they've got under the skin of the government, that this whole thing has a political context, much more than a historical or a cultural context. There's a political context to what's at play.
See, you're a political journalist, you can decide whatever you wish. The fact of the matter is, this issue was debated in the Constituent Assembly. The Constitution of India begins by saying India, that is Bharat. By the way, the Hindi version says Bharat, Arthat, India. So there is no debate about one word being somehow more important than the other. So my view is, why are we so emotional about the fact that the word government of Bharat is being used? So we will use it. As everybody agrees that it's all right to have different words for a certain country, as we, United Kingdom and Great Britain, Netherlands and Holland, Japan and Nippon, and so on. There are many countries with multiple names. We can also have one. My problem is that somehow the use of Bharat seemed to have rankled members of the old elite. Somehow they thought that when they were reading the Constitution, I think they misread it as India that was Bharat. But they should read the Constitution. It says India that is Bharat.
Okay. I'll leave it over there. It is India that is Bharat, not India that was Bharat. Most certainly, it will be interesting to see where this debate goes from here. Sanjeev, Sanyal, for joining us and sharing your point of view on the India-Bharat controversy. Thank you very much. We'll slip into a break. I hope you enjoyed the 2 points of view articulated very strongly, but from different positions in the ideological spectrum, really giving you a full sense of the India-Bharat debate.